During World War II, landing craft, something built to storm the beaches of Normandy and reshaping it into a floating fortress. That's exactly what the U.S. Navy did during the Vietnam War. They armed them, and sent them deep into the Mekong Delta's rivers. Before we dive into this fascinating story of innovation, courage, and adaptation, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. It helps us bring you more hidden history like this, stories you won't find in your average textbook. Your support keeps history alive, one forgotten chapter at a time. When most of us think of the Vietnam War, we picture dense jungles, helicopter assaults, and endless rice paddies. Yet the Mekong Delta, a sprawling labyrinth of rivers, canals, and swamps, posed a unique challenge. In this watery world, traditional tanks and trucks were nearly useless. The Navy had to improvise. That improvisation gave birth to the Brown Water Navy, a fleet of riverine forces tasked with patrolling waterways, interdicting enemy supplies, and supporting ground troops. Among its most iconic vessels were the river monitors, repurposed World War II landing craft turned into floating fortresses. Their story is one of ingenuity and determination. The Mekong Delta was the lifeline of South Vietnam. It carried rice, supplies, and people, but it was also a perfect hiding place for the Viet Cong. Enemy fighters used small boats to move weapons and ambush American and South Vietnamese forces. Traditional U.S. naval ships with their deep hulls couldn't navigate these shallow, twisting waters. Destroyers, cruisers, and aircraft carriers were powerful in open seas but useless in muddy backwaters. The Army needed armored firepower inland. The Navy needed vessels small enough to go upriver, yet tough enough to survive ambushes. The answer came from an unexpected place: mothballed landing craft from World War II. During World War II, the U.S. produced thousands of landing craft, flat-bottomed boats designed to land troops and equipment on hostile shores. By the 1960s, many of these boats sat idle in naval yards. They were outdated for beach assaults, but they had one advantage: they could handle shallow water. The Navy took the LCM, landing craft mechanized, as the foundation. These vessels were about 56 feet long, wide, and sturdy. Their flat bottoms made them perfect for rivers, though not ideal for open seas. With modification, they could carry heavy armor and weapons. This was the start of the transformation, taking relics of World War II and turning them into the backbone of a new kind of naval warfare. Turning an old landing craft into a fighting monitor wasn't simple. Engineers stripped the vessels down and rebuilt them with armor, weapon mounts, and enclosed turrets. Steel plates covered the hull, protecting the crew from small arms and shrapnel. Sandbags, bar armor, and even wire mesh added layers of defense against rockets and grenades. Each monitor was a floating arsenal. The centerpiece was a 40mm Bofors cannon in a turret, originally used for anti-aircraft fire in WWII. Alongside it, they mounted an 81mm mortar and a well deck for indirect fire. The decks bristled with 50-caliber machine guns, 20mm cannons, grenade launchers, and sometimes flamethrowers. Typically 10 to 12 sailors manned a monitor, each responsible for gunnery, navigation, or maintenance. The result was a ship small enough to prowl narrow rivers but deadly enough to stand its ground in ambushes. By 1967, these monitors were part of the Mobile Riverine Force, a joint Army-Navy unit. Their mission was clear: deny the Viet Cong the use of rivers. They patrolled day and night, escorting convoys, ferrying troops, and bombarding enemy positions. In many ways, they brought the firepower of a destroyer into the shallow Mekong channels. To the sailors, life aboard was tense. The rivers were never safe. At any moment, hidden fighters could unleash a storm of rockets and bullets. Crews slept in shifts, weapons always loaded, eyes always scanning the riverbanks. Yet, despite the dangers, the Brown Water Navy gave American forces something invaluable: mobility in the Mekong. Let's pause and appreciate just how much firepower these monitors carried. The 40mm Bofors cannon was the main gun. In Vietnam, it was devastating against bunkers, sampans, and fortified positions along the banks. The 81mm mortar, placed in a central pit, allowed the crew to lob shells into hidden enemy camps beyond direct line of sight. Dozens of M250 caliber machine guns lined the decks, their heavy rounds able to cut through foliage and light cover with ease. For close-range fights, 20mm cannons and grenade launchers unleashed walls of firepower. Some monitors even carried napalm projectors to burn away hiding spots. In the thick vegetation, no single weapon made the monitors powerful. It was the combination, the overlapping fields of fire, and the ability to deliver both direct and indirect fire in an instant. For the crews, life on a monitor was unlike service on any other Navy ship. The boats were cramped. With armor added, space was limited. The tropical heat was oppressive, and the smell of oil, sweat, and river water filled the air. Food was basic, rations eaten quickly between patrols. Sleep came in short bursts, often interrupted by sudden alarms. Crews learned to live with constant tension. The riverbanks were always potential kill zones, and every bend in the river could hide an ambush. Yet camaraderie was strong. These sailors were brothers bound by shared danger. Many later recalled their time on monitors as some of the most intense and meaningful service of their lives. Monitors proved their worth in combat again and again. In ambushes, they responded with overwhelming firepower, silencing enemy guns in minutes. Their mortars allowed them to hit camps hidden behind tree lines. Their armor often saved crews from what would otherwise have been deadly attacks. They supported Army troops, ferrying them upriver, providing covering fire, and evacuating the wounded. In essence, they became mobile fire bases, able to bring artillery support wherever rivers could carry them. Stories abound of monitors charging into enemy fire, guns blazing to rescue pinned down soldiers. Their shallow draft meant they could get closer to combat zones than almost any other craft. It wasn't just the firepower that mattered, it was the message. To the Viet Cong, the monitors were a constant reminder that the Americans could reach them even in the remotest canals. To civilians, their presence was both reassuring and intimidating. The sight of a monitor rolling down a narrow river, bristling with guns, was unforgettable. For allies, it meant protection. For enemies, it meant fear. Yet, these floating fortresses had limitations. They were relatively slow, making them vulnerable in certain situations. In tight canals, turning was difficult. Crews often had to reverse long distances under fire. While armored, they were not invincible. Rockets and recoilless rifles could penetrate. Mines placed in rivers were a constant threat, and long patrols in hostile territory wore down morale. Despite these challenges, the monitors consistently proved their value. By the early 1970s, as U.S. forces withdrew, many monitors were handed over to the South Vietnamese Navy. They continued to serve, though often with limited resources and dwindling support. Today, few remain. Most were scrapped after the war. Yet their legacy endures. They represent a chapter of the Vietnam War that showed creativity under pressure, taking old ships and reinventing them for a new kind of fight. What can we learn from this story? Wars are unpredictable. The challenges of the Mekong Delta required out-of-the-box thinking. The U.S. Navy didn't have time to design new ships. Instead, they adapted what they had, turning World War II relics into effective modern weapons. It's a reminder that sometimes the past can be reshaped to meet the demands of the present. Beyond the steel and firepower, we must remember the sailors themselves. Many were young, barely out of high school. They faced ambushes, endured hardship, and carried out missions with quiet courage. When we speak of monitors, we're really speaking of the men who crewed them, men who transformed fear into duty and duty into history. The story of the river monitors is not just about technology. It's about adaptation, resilience, and human spirit. In the muddy waters of the Mekong, these vessels gave American forces a fighting chance. They were not perfect. They did not win the war. But they stood as symbols of determination. They remind us that even in the darkest times, ingenuity can light a path forward. So the next time you hear about the Vietnam War, remember the forgotten fleet, the monitors that prowled the rivers, blending the past and present into something entirely new. They were more than machines. They were lifelines, shields, and stories of courage afloat.